I didn't know a lot of the history I was just referring to about the AHA and other groups. I didn't know then that the large historical societies of the Midwest had promoted applied history in the early 20th century. I didn't know that the AHA had done contract work for government in both World War I and World War II. Not all of it the organization eventually was proud of, but we've got it up there on the website. The GI pamphlets being a particularly interesting and sometimes amusing example of that. But there was, in fact, I came to know, a long history of historians of involvement in many sectors of society beyond the academy. I was asked to build bridges, to make connections, and for the next 30 months, that's just what I did. No one, at the point of my being hired, mentioned public history. Public history so labeled barely existed at this point, except in the plans and dreams of Bob Kelly and Wes Johnson and perhaps a few of their students in that first entering class at UCSB in 1976. But there were public historians, and there was public history. There were people in other fields allied to history from which it had been disconnected. Archives, historic preservation, business, museum work, even pre-collegiate teaching. But this hadn't been claimed by the association, and the points of connection were not anything but fragile. Kelly and Johnson were the first to use the name public history, so far as I know. But elsewhere there were history departments developing programs for training archivists, museum curators, cultural resource managers, public policy work, and other possibilities. Arizona State University and Carnegie Mellon were two of the most prominent, but others soon followed. And there were historians already working in business, state legislatures, state historical societies, foundations, other organizations. The most important sector was the federal government, where several hundred historians worked in agency history offices, the National Archives, the National Park Service, the Smithsonian Institution, and the military history centers. I want to argue here that the Washington Federal History Establishment was at this juncture most critical in the development of the National Council on Public History. Richard Hewlett of the Department of Energy was an old hand in Washington and made many introductions. Was a mentor for me. I really can't stress just how helpful he was at this particular point. In September, well, the other thing is the federal historians themselves were also beginning to become conscious of being a sort of group, and were beginning to organize. In September of 1977, David Trask, then historian at the Department of State, convened a meeting of some 150 federal historians. And he invited me. I think I was the only non-federal historian at that meeting. But he thought it would be, he had been supportive of what I was trying to do with the National Coordinating Committee and thought it would be a good educational day for me, and it was. That led the National Coordinating Committee, with the support from AHA, to undertake the following year a survey of federal history offices. I'm going to have to get some more liquid. I think this will work. The survey identified about 125 history offices throughout the government. Many in the military, others in the Senate, the Department of Agriculture, Department of Labor, and a number of other departments, excuse me, and agencies of the executive branch, as well as the judiciary. Moreover, we were able to identify not only where the historical offices were, but what the historians in them did. Information that turned out to be most helpful to the new programs beginning to sprout up around the country. Many federal historians were willing to travel to various campuses and discuss their work for students and faculty, and also take part in career sessions at meetings of various historical groups. Let's see. You want to come read this, Phil? I have a mint, but, well, okay, let me try this. I'm not sure I can. No, I have cough drops.
Oh, you got some. Oh, okay.
But I've never read a paper with a cough drop in my mouth.
Think of it as the new Demosthenes.
But we'll try. Funding agencies were an important part of the development of public history as well. And I honestly don't think I can. Yeah, if you could. There may be a page where I wrote in a few things, but I think you can do it. Right here. Sorry about that, folks.
I'm sure I'm much younger.
I just saw I didn't